The instructor reaches over, pulls the throttle to idle. The engine goes quiet. Not an emergency, not a malfunction. He did that on purpose. Now he pulls the nose up, higher than it should be, higher than it ever goes in normal flight. The airspeed is dropping. The stick shaker activates. A violent mechanical vibration rattles through the controls, and then the nose drops, hard, without warning. The horizon disappears from the windshield. The ground fills the view. The student's hands are frozen. The instructor says nothing. He is waiting to see what the student does in the next 3 seconds, because those 3 seconds are the difference between recovery and a fatal accident. And this is not an emergency drill. This is Tuesday morning. This is scheduled. This is required. Every pilot in the world has sat in that seat, has felt that nose drop, has had 3 seconds to respond correctly, because if they haven't practiced it, they won't survive it when it happens for real. Here is what almost nobody outside aviation understands. A stall is not an engine failure. The engine can be running perfectly, full power, all systems normal, and the aircraft can still stall, because a stall has nothing to do with the engine. It has everything to do with the wing. And here is the second thing most people get wrong. A stall is not the aircraft falling out of the sky. Not immediately, not automatically. A stall is a specific aerodynamic condition, a precise, definable, recoverable event, and it is one of the most important things a pilot can learn. Not by reading about it, not by watching a simulation, but by feeling it happen beneath their hands in a real aircraft at altitude with an instructor watching every input they make. To understand why pilots train for this deliberately, you have to understand what a stall actually is at the physics level. A wing generates lift through one mechanism, the difference in pressure between its upper and lower surfaces. As air flows around the wing, the shape of the airfoil accelerates the flow over the top surface. Pressure drops above the wing. Pressure remains higher below. That pressure difference produces an upward force, lift. But that process depends entirely on one condition. The airflow must remain attached to the wing's upper surface. When it does, lift is produced predictably and continuously. When it doesn't, everything changes. The angle at which the wing meets the oncoming air is called the angle of attack. As that angle increases, lift increases. The wing works harder. It produces more upward force, up to a point. That point is called the critical angle of attack. On most commercial aircraft, it sits between 15 and 20 degrees. Beyond that angle, the airflow can no longer follow the curvature of the upper wing surface. It separates, it detaches, and becomes turbulent. The smooth pressure distribution collapses. Lift drops suddenly, dramatically, and asymmetrically across the wing. The aircraft pitches nose down. If the wings are uneven, one stalls before the other, the aircraft rolls as well. This is the stall, not an engine failure, not a loss of control inputs, a loss of aerodynamic lift caused by exceeding the critical angle of attack. And it can happen at any speed, at any altitude, in any configuration. That last point is the one that gets pilots killed. The common misconception is that stalls only happen at low speed. And while low airspeed is the most common trigger, because maintaining lift at low speed requires a higher angle of attack, a stall is purely an angle of attack event. An aircraft can stall at cruise speed if the angle of attack is forced high enough, fast enough. An aircraft can stall during a hard turn when the increased load factor demands more lift from the wing than it can produce at the current angle of attack. An aircraft can stall in the final seconds before landing if the pilot flares too aggressively and the nose rises past the critical angle before the aircraft has touched the ground. These are not theoretical scenarios. They appear repeatedly in accident reports. A 2009 regional jet accident in Buffalo, New York, an unstabilized approach, an unexpected stick shaker activation. The captain pulled back on the controls, the instinctive response, but the wrong one. The aircraft stalled fully and impacted terrain. 49 people died. A 2009 Air France departure from Rio de Janeiro. High altitude, unusual meteorological conditions, unreliable airspeed indications. The crew maintained a nose-high attitude at high altitude. The aircraft stalled at 38,000 feet. It remained in a stall for 4 minutes and 14 seconds while descending from cruise altitude to the Atlantic Ocean. 228 people died. In both cases, the fundamental error was the same. When the stall warning activated, the crew did not respond with the correct input, and the correct input is deeply counterintuitive. When an aircraft stalls, when the nose drops, the ground fills the windshield and every instinct in the human body is screaming. The correct response is to push the nose further down, to point the nose at the ground, to reduce angle of attack, to restore airflow attachment to the wing. Only after the wing is flying again can the pilot apply power and pull out of the descent. That response, push forward, nose down, into the dive, is so contrary to human survival instinct that it cannot be learned by reading. It must be practiced until it is not a decision, until it is a reflex, until the hands move correctly before the mind has time to hesitate. That is why stall training exists. That is why it is mandatory. That is why it is done in a real aircraft, with a real instructor, in real conditions, not in a classroom. Now, let's look at how that training is actually structured. Stall training does not begin at the stall itself. It begins long before the critical angle of attack is reached. The first phase is stall recognition. The aircraft is flown into a progressively slower configuration. Power is reduced. The nose is held up. Airspeed bleeds away. As the wing approaches its critical angle of attack, several things happen in sequence, and the pilot must learn to identify each one. First, buffet. The turbulent, separated airflow from the wing begins to strike the horizontal stabilizer at the tail. The entire aircraft shudders, a light, intermittent vibration that builds as angle of attack increases. This is the aerodynamic warning. The wing is telling the pilot, in the only language it has, that it is approaching its limit. Second, the stick shaker. On commercial aircraft, an angle of attack sensor monitors the wing continuously. When the sensor detects an angle approaching the critical threshold, it activates a mechanical device attached to the control column. The column vibrates violently in the pilot's hands. This is not subtle. It is designed to be impossible to ignore. Third, the stall warning tone. A synthetic voice or a horn activates simultaneously, "Stall! Stall! Stall!" These three warnings, buffet, stick shaker, stall tone, occur within seconds of each other. They give the pilot a window, a narrow window, to act before the wing fully separates. The trained response at this stage is called the approach to stall recovery. Maximum thrust, nose to the horizon, wings level, minimum altitude loss. The pilot does not allow the stall to develop. They act on the warning and return the aircraft to normal flight. The second phase is the full stall. The pilot does not respond to the warnings. The angle of attack continues to increase. The wing fully separates. The nose drops. Now, the pilot must execute the full stall recovery. Nose forward, reducing angle of attack. Maximum thrust applied simultaneously. Wings leveled with rudder if a roll has developed. The aircraft accelerates in the dive. As airspeed builds, back pressure is applied gradually. The nose is raised toward the horizon. Altitude loss is noted and accepted as the cost of recovery. This sequence must be executed correctly on the first attempt. There is no time for hesitation. There is no room for the wrong input. A full stall at low altitude, during approach or just after takeoff, may provide less than 1,000 feet of altitude for recovery. At a descent rate exceeding 4,000 feet per minute during the initial stall break, that is approximately 15 seconds. 15 seconds from stall break to impact if no recovery is initiated. This is the number that every student pilot carries with them after their first stall training session. Beyond the basic stall, training programs include a series of increasingly demanding scenarios. The first is the accelerated stall. The aircraft is placed in a banked turn, typically 45 degrees of bank. Power is reduced. Back pressure is applied to maintain altitude in the turn. In a turn, the wing must produce more lift than in level flight because part of the lift vector is directed inward towards the center of the turn. To generate this additional lift, angle of attack increases. An accelerated stall can occur at airspeeds significantly higher than the straight and level stall speed. A 45-degree banked turn increases stall speed by approximately 19%. A 60-degree bank increases stall speed by approximately 41%. This is a scenario pilots encounter in real operations, during the traffic pattern turns, during visual approaches, during any situation requiring aggressive maneuvering at low altitude. The second advanced scenario is the cross-controlled stall. The aircraft is placed in a low-altitude turn, simulating the turn from base leg to final approach. The aircraft rolls suddenly toward the stalled wing, often rapidly and with little warning. At pattern altitude, typically 500 to 1,000 feet above the ground, recovery may not be possible. The cross-controlled stall has caused a disproportionate number of fatal accidents during the base-to-final turn, a turn that every pilot makes on every single flight. The third scenario, trained exclusively in simulators for commercial pilots, is the high-altitude stall. At cruise altitude, the aircraft operates in a narrow band between two limits. The lower limit is the low-speed stall, the angle of attack limit that governs all flight. The upper limit is the high-speed buffet boundary, the point at which the airflow over the wing approaches transonic speed and shock waves form, also producing buffet. The gap between these two limits narrows as altitude increases. At 40,000 feet, the margin between too slow and too fast may be only 20 to 30 knots on some aircraft types. This narrow band is called the coffin corner. A loss of situational awareness in this regime, allowing airspeed to decay while maintaining altitude, can result in a stall from which recovery may require descending through tens of thousands of feet before the aircraft re-enters controllable airspeed. This is exactly what happened to the famous plane. Modern training programs, particularly after that accident, now include mandatory high-altitude upset recovery training. Pilots practice recovering from unusual attitudes, from approach to stall conditions at altitude, and from the specific scenario where airspeed indications become unreliable. Because in that scenario, the pilot cannot read the instruments to know how close to the stall they are. They must fly by attitude, by the position of the nose relative to the horizon until reliable data returns. And that skill, pure attitude, flying without instrument reference, is one that deteriorates rapidly without practice, which is why every recurrent training cycle, every 6 months, every type-rated commercial pilot returns to the simulator, returns to that moment. The throttle pulled to idle, the nose raised, the stick shaker activating, and the decision that cannot be delayed. The stall is not the enemy. The untrained response to the stall is the enemy. That is why the training exists. That is why it is uncomfortable. That is why it is designed to feel like an emergency in a controlled environment, so that the real emergency, if it comes, feels like training. Every pilot who has completed stall training has been in that seat, nose high, speed bleeding, controls shaking in their hands, and they pushed forward into the dive. Against every instinct, because they had done it before, because they knew that the ground rushing toward them was not the danger was hesitating, and that knowledge, built in a training aircraft at altitude on a scheduled Tuesday morning, is what stands between a normal flight and an entry in an accident report. If you've ever wondered what actually happens during engine failure at takeoff, the decision speeds, the abort procedures, the exact sequence pilots follow, I've covered that in full detail in another video.